Three chilling winter tales, stories of isolation and fear. Winter blankets the world in a cold, quiet stillness, creating an eerie sense of isolation.
Story 1. Uber Eats. Delivery to an occupied house. This happened just a couple of weeks before Christmas. Winter was in full swing, and snow was piling up in thick drifts, but I didn't have the luxury of staying home. Uber Eats was the easiest way to make some cash during the holiday break. Borrowing my dad's old pickup truck, I set out into the snowy night. The roads were treacherous, blanketed in fresh snow, but orders kept coming, one after another. Each one paid well, and I couldn't afford to stop. After 3 hours of nonstop work, a new order came in. A pickup from a 24-hour diner to be delivered to an address on the other side of the county. The area looked decent on the map, a neighborhood with older, large houses. I decided this would be my last delivery for the night. When I arrived, the driveway was completely buried under a foot of snow, so I had to park on the street. The cold bit at my face as I trudged through the deep snow, my boots sinking with each step. As I reached the house, I noticed something strange. No lights were on. Not a single window glowed with warmth. A piece of paper was taped to the front door. In bold, red letters, it read, "Notice." The first few lines mentioned something about a county inspection. Then I heard it. Footsteps crunching in the snow behind me. I turned around quickly and saw a man emerging from behind the garage. His appearance was unsettling. A buzz cut, a dirty jacket, and tired, hollow eyes. Something about him put me on edge instantly. "Just here to drop off your order," I said, hoping to break the silence. The man didn't reply. He just reached out his hand for the bag. I handed it to him, but he didn't move. He stayed rooted to the path, watching me. "Have a good night," I said, stepping to the side to walk past him. That's when I saw it, a quick movement in my peripheral vision. He swung his arm toward me, as if trying to grab me. I stumbled back and turned to face him. He stepped closer, his hand outstretched. "Come with me," he muttered, his voice low and commanding. Fear shot through me, and I started backing away, the thick snow slowing me down. He began to chase me, yelling for me to stop running. Adrenaline took over, and I finally managed to get my footing. I sprinted back to the truck, climbed in, and slammed the door shut. As I reversed, the man reached the edge of the driveway, standing still in the snow, watching me with that same cold stare. I called the police as soon as I was out of the neighborhood. Later, they told me that the house had been unoccupied for months. The owners had moved out, and it was scheduled to go on the market. To this day, I have no idea what that man wanted or why he was there. All I know is that every time I approach a house with no lights on, I feel that same sense of unease. I can't help but wonder if he's waiting at another house for someone else. Story 2. The Cabin and the Angry Visitor. Last New Year's Eve, my two best friends and I decided to rent a cabin for the night. We weren't big on huge parties, so a quiet house just for us seemed perfect. None of us were used to having that much space, since we all lived in dorm rooms. Jason was the one who booked the Airbnb. It was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a handful of similar-looking cabins, all spaced far apart. The place had a rustic charm, but the inside was less appealing. Worn furniture, creaky floors, and a faint, musty smell. We weren't expecting luxury, though. The afternoon was spent lounging in the living room, talking and laughing. Around 6 p.m., our friend Christian went out to grab snacks and drinks, leaving Jason and me behind. That's when we heard a knock at the door. It was unexpected. This wasn't the kind of place where people casually stopped by, especially not at an Airbnb. Jason and I exchanged looks before I got up to check. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a man standing on the doorstep. He didn't look like the host or a neighbor, just an ordinary guy in a heavy jacket. Still, I flipped the metal latch on the door and cracked it open slightly. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man's expression was cold, bordering on hostile. His tone matched as he said, "You need to keep it down tonight. Don't disturb the neighborhood." His words were both accusatory and threatening, like we'd already been causing trouble. But we hadn't done anything loud. With the cabins so far apart, it wasn't even possible to disturb anyone unless we were setting off fireworks. "Sure, no problem," I replied, closing the door without another word. But the second it shut, the man banged on it again, harder this time. Jason and I froze, listening. After a few moments, the banging stopped, and we heard him walking away. When Christian returned, we told him about the encounter, but he just laughed, thinking we were exaggerating. The next few hours were uneventful. We watched a movie and played games on Jason's Switch, trying to shake off the weirdness of earlier. Then, just before midnight, the peace shattered. From outside, we heard a loud crash, like something heavy hitting the ground. Before we could react, the sound of glass breaking echoed through the cabin. We ran to the window and saw the same man standing by Christian's car, his windshield shattered. The man was gripping a metal baseball bat, pacing around like he was in a frenzy. Christian was furious and stormed toward the door, ready to confront him. Jason and I followed, trying to stop him. But before we even reached the doorway, a gunshot rang out. We froze, the sound still echoing in our ears. A moment later, Christian sprinted back inside, slamming the door and locking it. More gunshots followed, the bullets hitting the side of the cabin. Then, we heard the man slamming the bat against the front door, each hit shaking the frame. Suddenly, the chaos stopped. Silence. We didn't dare move until the police arrived. It turned out that the man wasn't a neighbor, as we'd assumed. In fact, no one in the area seemed to know who he was or where he came from. Whatever his reasons, he disappeared into the night, leaving behind only damage and fear. Story 3. The Ice Fishing Stalker. Last winter, I rented a small cabin near a frozen lake known for ice fishing. It was a quiet, remote getaway, surrounded by snow-covered woods. I often went fishing with friends, but this time I decided to spend a few days alone. The cabin was as basic as it gets. A single room with a fireplace, a bed, and a tiny kitchenette. No Wi-Fi, no distractions. Just me, the lake, and the silence of winter. On the first day, I settled in by the fire, brewed some coffee, and enjoyed the solitude. The snow fell gently outside as the wind whispered through the trees. It felt peaceful, almost serene. The next morning, I woke early, bundled up in my warmest clothes, and made my way down the narrow path to the lake. The snow crunched under my boots as I carried my fishing gear. Once there, I drilled a hole in the ice and set up my spot. For hours, I sat in the stillness, watching the frozen surface of the lake and the distant tree line. The solitude was refreshing, until I noticed something unsettling. As I packed up to leave, I saw another set of footprints in the snow. They weren't mine. These tracks followed my earlier path from the cabin to the lake, stopping just a few feet behind where I'd been sitting. Then they turned back toward the woods. My heart sank. Someone had been here, watching me, and I hadn't noticed. Feeling a knot of unease in my stomach, I followed the footprints back toward the cabin. They mirrored my path exactly, except instead of going to the cabin, they veered off into the trees. I couldn't see where they led. I hurried back inside, locked the door, and tried to shake off the fear. Whoever it was must have just been curious, I told myself. Maybe another ice fisher passing by. That evening, I stayed inside, reading by the fire. The storm outside had picked up, snow and wind howling against the windows. I forced myself to relax, but just as I began to feel at ease, I heard it. Faint, deliberate crunching in the snow. Someone was outside. I moved to the window and peeked out. My breath caught. A figure stood just at the edge of the woods, their silhouette faint against the swirling snow. They stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, walking down the same path I had taken earlier. As they neared the cabin, they turned directly toward the window I was hiding behind. I ducked, pressing my back to the wall, my heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder until they stopped right outside. Summoning the courage to look, I glanced up just enough to see their shadow looming against the frosted glass. For a moment, they stood still. Then, the window rattled as they tried to open it. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a knife from the kitchenette, and stood frozen in place. After a few tense moments of struggle, the rattling stopped. Then the footsteps started again, this time retreating into the woods. I watched from the window as the figure disappeared into the swirling snow, their shape swallowed by the storm. I didn't stay the night. Grabbing my keys and my essentials, I ran to my car and left the cabin behind. I still don't know who was watching me that night or what they wanted. But the thought of their footsteps leading right to the window where I hid still haunts me to this day.